I want to use this comment to talk about a point of view that I had when it came to 1980s pop music. Now, I was a kid during the 1980s, and honestly, when it came to that music, I could take it or leave it. I didn't like it. I didn't really hate it, though. It was, some things I'd like, some things I wasn't into, but I wasn't like a pop music fan. But then in the 1990s, I started to really pay attention to pop music from the 1970s. Like, this was the first time that I'd heard the album from the band Parliament, The Clones of Dr. Funkenstein. And I thought, wow, this is like better than some of the stuff I'm hearing now. And then I had heard Donny Hathaway's music, one of his albums, Extensions of a Man. Then I had heard the band The Ohio Players for the first time. So there was a lot of music that I was hearing from the 70s that I liked a lot and was thinking, man, this is better than some of the stuff in the 80s. But a turning point came when I heard an album from 1970s from the band Genesis. Now, Genesis was a band that was popular in the 80s, and I was very familiar with their music. But then I heard this album called Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, and I was floored. I mean, I loved the album, and honestly, it made me turn sour to 1980s pop music. It was so bad to the point that I said, man, is there any way where we could take master recordings of 80s pop music and set them on fire and make sure that people never hear it again? I mean, I was like super bitter about it. But what changed that was late 90s pop music. The teen pop music that was going on, and some of the rap. I mean, honestly, some of it was from New Orleans. And a lot of the musical content was really weak, to be honest with you. And then when I looked back at the 80s, I said, well, wait a minute. These songs actually had form. They had chord changes. They had chorus, and they had lyrics. And they had, you would have instrumental solos, and you'd have bands, even though drum machines were starting to take over. What I realized was during the popularity of the 80s, there were elements of music that I took for granted. There was even a musician that told me that when Michael Jackson's Thriller came out, he didn't like it at first because he was hearing it all the time. But 10 years later, he heard it again and said, wow, this production is amazing, and the songs are incredible, and the playing is great. So that's a thing that happens. Now, as far as the 1970s, I would still prefer that decade because even when the 1980s, like the jazz fusion stuff, I was more into the 70s. Like, for example, I'm not really a Spyro Gyra guy. I'm more of a Mahavishnu Orchestra guy. And I'm not really a Yellow Jackets guy. I'm more of a Weather Report guy. Hell, we could take Chick Corea alone. I wasn't really an electric band guy. I was a Return to Forever guy. And so while I'm still partial to the 70s, the 80s still had some good music and some good content. There were things, of course, that were very watered down and very mainstream, but good content nonetheless. So worst time for the arts? No. That would actually be now.